10 million years ago, the ocean held something Earth has never repeated. Two apex predators of almost unimaginable size were hunting the same prey in the same waters at the same time. One was Megalodon, the largest shark ever known, reaching roughly 50 feet in length, armed with enormous serrated teeth and an estimated bite force approaching 40,000 pounds. And it did not rule alone. Sharing those waters was a whale, not a filter feeder, not an animal surviving on plankton. Livyatan was a predator built to attack large marine mammals, carrying enormous jaws and the largest known biting teeth of any animal, some approaching 14 inches long. For a time, these two animals occupied overlapping oceans and targeted many of the same kinds of prey, and that overlap may have gone further than competition. Scientists have even considered whether Livyatan was capable of attacking Megalodon itself. The anatomy makes the possibility difficult to ignore, but the fossil record does not give us a simple winner. Neither predator survived. Within a few million years of their period of overlap, both disappeared, and the marine world that followed would develop without anything quite like either of them. That leaves a much stranger story than a prehistoric fight. Two enormous predators did not necessarily need to meet face to face to damage one another. Competition can happen through every meal taken, every hunting ground occupied, and every generation forced to survive on what remains. Whether that alone explains what happened is something the fossil record still has to reveal. In tonight's journey, we're going back into the Miocene Ocean, where two radically different predators reached the top of the same food web and somehow had to share it. Now, let's begin. Long before either giant reached its full dominion, the sea had already prepared the conditions that could sustain them. The Miocene epoch stretched from roughly 23 million to 5.3 million years ago, across a planet warmer than the one we know today. Broad coastal shelves lay beneath sunlit water, and productive marine habitats extended farther toward the poles. Currents carried nutrients through these shallow regions, feeding immense webs of plankton, fish, and marine mammals. Among the greatest beneficiaries were baleen whales. Their evolutionary radiation transformed the oceans, contributing to one of the richest known intervals of marine mammal diversity preserved in the fossil record across many regions of the world. Dozens of species occupied Miocene waters, many far smaller than the enormous baleen whales familiar today. Animals roughly 23 to 33 feet long moved through productive coastal regions, feeding where seasonal blooms concentrated life into exceptionally rich feeding grounds. Some traveled between habitats, while others occupied ecological roles that later disappeared as climates and currents changed. This abundance mattered far beyond the whales themselves. Large predators cannot exist merely because evolution produces formidable teeth or powerful bodies. Every pound of predator must ultimately be supported by energy passing upward through the food web. At the top, where each meal represents an enormous investment of biological productivity, that requirement becomes especially severe. A sea capable of sustaining predators weighing tens of thousands of pounds first needs enough smaller life to sustain the animals those predators consume. The Miocene achieved that balance for an extraordinary interval. Plankton supported smaller organisms. Those organisms supported fish and marine mammals, and flourishing populations of medium-sized whales placed vast packages of flesh within reach of hunters capable of taking them. Coastal shelves offered feeding grounds, migration corridors, breeding habitat, and concentrations of prey. Instead of being scattered thinly across an empty expanse, edible biomass repeatedly gathered into places where a sufficiently specialized predator could exploit it. That ecological wealth allowed predatory size to move toward an unusual extreme. One lineage approached the problem through the ancient architecture of sharks, refining a body built around swimming efficiency, replaceable teeth, sensory precision, and an enormous jaw. Another arrived through mammalian evolution, carrying lungs, a large brain, internal heat, and a radically different set of possibilities. Both could become gigantic because the ocean beneath them was productive enough to pay the energetic cost. Yet abundance is never the same as infinity. Every whale required years of growth. Every calf depended on successful reproduction, sufficient food, and survival through vulnerable early life. Even exceptionally productive seas had carrying capacities set by nutrients, habitat, climate, and the rate at which prey populations could replace themselves. A predator could remove energy from that system much faster than evolution could create new resources. For a time, the balance held. Enough large prey existed for immense hunters to emerge without immediately exhausting the foundation beneath them. That temporary surplus produced something exceptionally rare: two apex predators approaching the same extraordinary scale within overlapping marine ecosystems. Their existence was therefore inseparable from the world that fed them. They were expressions of Miocene abundance, shaped upward from plankton blooms, coastal productivity, and generations of whales. The same ecological machinery that permitted such giants also placed a boundary around how many the ocean could support. Within that boundary, two different evolutionary paths were converging upon the same source of food. Their histories would become entangled through appetite, geography, and the finite arithmetic of living prey. But the first physical trace of that convergence is much smaller than either animal. It is a tooth. At full size, Megalodon turned the familiar outline of a shark into something almost architectural. Most modern estimates place large adults between 49 and 59 feet long, while some models allow exceptional individuals to approach 67 feet. Depending on the reconstruction used, the heaviest animals may have exceeded 120,000 pounds. Much of that mass was concentrated in a deep, muscular body capable of driving an enormous head through the water with sustained force. The teeth reveal how that force was used. The largest known specimens reach roughly 7 inches from root to tip, close to the length of an adult human hand. Each tooth carried serrations along its cutting edges, creating a broad blade able to open thick flesh rather than merely puncture it. Like living sharks, Megalodon continually replaced damaged or lost teeth. Over a lifetime, one animal could shed thousands, leaving behind the durable fragments that now appear in marine sediments, coastal deposits, and riverbeds across much of the world. Its jaws amplified those blades. Biomechanical reconstructions have produced upper estimates near 40,000 pounds of bite force. Although any value for an extinct shark depends on assumptions about body size and muscle geometry. Even allowing for that uncertainty, the bite belonged at the extreme end of vertebrate predation. Yet the most revealing evidence is not the calculated force. It is the damage preserved on whales. Fossil ribs, vertebrae, flippers, and other bones carry deep gouges and serrated impressions matching large shark teeth. Some specimens preserve megalodon teeth embedded directly in bone. Particularly important are injuries around the appendages used for swimming. Bite traces on flippers and near the tail suggest that attacks could disable locomotion before the predator committed itself to feeding on more vulnerable parts of the body. Against a whale, removing effective propulsion changed the encounter completely. A powerful swimmer became an animal struggling to maintain speed, direction, and balance. This strategy required more than a heavy body drifting toward prey. Chemical evidence preserved in fossil teeth indicates that Megalodon maintained parts of its body warmer than surrounding seawater, a form of regional endothermy also seen in living great white and mako sharks. Elevated muscle temperatures can improve swimming performance and expand the range of conditions in which active hunting remains effective. Megalodon was therefore likely capable of sustained energetic movement rather than depending entirely on brief ambushes. That physiology came with an immense energetic cost. A predator weighing more than 100,000 pounds could not maintain itself on occasional small fish. Large marine mammals offer dense concentrations of fat, muscle, and organs in a single successful hunt. Whales were not merely convenient prey. For mature megalodon populations, they were among the resources capable of supporting bodies of such extraordinary scale over generations. The physical record follows that relationship across oceans. Megalodon feeding traces occur on fossil cetaceans from Peru, South Africa, Australia, and deposits bordering the Atlantic. Jaw dimensions reconstructed from large teeth correspond with bite arcs too broad for smaller contemporary sharks. Individual fossils cannot preserve every stage of a hunt, but together they reveal repeated contact between this predator and large marine mammals. Its discarded teeth also map the reach of the animal itself. They have been recovered from every continent except Antarctica, scattered through deposits formed in warm coastal waters and farther offshore. Across those regions, the same anatomy traveled with it: a massive swimming body, continually renewed cutting teeth, elevated metabolism, and a hunting system capable of turning a whale's own movement against it. Wherever suitable water and abundant prey converged, those tools placed Megalodon among the dominant hunters moving through the open sea. The evidence began with bone emerging from desert stone. In November of 2008, researcher Class Post was crossing the Pisco Formation on the coast of Peru during the final day of a field expedition. The landscape around him was dry, but the rock beneath his feet had formed beneath an ancient sea. During the Miocene, these sediments accumulated underwater, preserving whales, sharks, seals, fish, and other animals within layers that would eventually rise into open desert. Post, a researcher associated with the Natural History Museum, Rotterdam, noticed an unusual fossil exposed at the surface. It could easily have been passed by. Instead, closer examination revealed part of an enormous cetacean skull. Excavation uncovered a cranium more than 9 feet long, accompanied by portions of the jaws and immense teeth. The animal had been buried for millions of years, yet enough remained to show that this was no ordinary sperm whale. Most revealing were the teeth still associated with the jaws, structures whose size and placement preserved the signature of an unfamiliar hunting method. When paleontologist Olivier Lambert and his colleagues formally described the specimen in 2010, they recognized a predator unlike any living whale. It was eventually named Livyatan melville. The genus recalled Leviathan, the biblical sea monster, while the species honored Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick, whose white sperm whale became one of literature's enduring images of power at sea. The resemblance to modern sperm whales, however, ended in important places. Living sperm whales are highly specialized deep water hunters. Their functional teeth occur primarily along the lower jaw, while much of their prey is captured through suction as they pursue squid and other animals far below the surface. Livyatan possessed a radically different feeding apparatus. Large, enamel-coated teeth occupied both the upper and lower jaws. They met across a mouth designed to seize flesh between opposing rows, giving the animal a true raptorial bite. This arrangement has no counterpart among living whales. Its jaws were not specialized for filtering plankton or drawing soft prey inward through suction. They were constructed to close around substantial animals and hold them while force passed through the skull. Its body matched the scale implied by that head. Reconstructions generally place Livyatan somewhere around 44 to 57 feet in length, although estimates remain uncertain because no complete skeleton has been recovered. Depending on the reconstruction, its mass may have occupied a range broadly around 80,000 to more than 120,000 pounds. Those dimensions placed a mature individual within the same general size class as the largest marine predator already roaming these waters. That convergence had emerged by the Middle and later Miocene, when raptorial sperm whales had become part of marine ecosystems rich in other cetaceans. Livyatan represented an extreme expression of that evolutionary experiment. Warm-blooded physiology powered a body of immense mass, while a mammalian skull carried a set of jaws capable of attacking large vertebrate prey directly. The fossil from Peru changed the shape of the ancient food web. Before its discovery, the enormous shark teeth scattered through Miocene deposits seemed to belong to a marine world whose uppermost predatory scale was dominated by Megalodon. Livyatan showed that another lineage had reached comparable dimensions through an entirely different anatomy. One was a shark whose lineage had refined cutting teeth and a vast swimming body. The other breathed air, bore live young, and carried opposing rows of enormous teeth in a skull longer than many living animals. In the same ancient seas, evolution had arrived twice at nearly the same predatory scale. The second giant was a whale. 14 inches of tooth changes the meaning of a bite. In Livyatan, the largest teeth reached roughly 14.2 inches in total length, including the root, placing them among the largest teeth adapted for biting known from any animal once tusks are excluded. They were thick, deeply anchored, coated in enamel, and positioned in both jaws. Their purpose was not simply to cut something passing through the mouth. They were built to remain engaged. The surfaces of fossil teeth preserve part of that story. Wear accumulated where repeated contact placed stress upon enamel, consistent with a predator using its jaws against substantial prey. Rather than relying on a brief slicing pass, Livyatan could seize an animal that was still moving, maintain contact, and use the strength of its head and body while the prey resisted. Flesh could be torn away under tension, with the teeth functioning as anchors as much as blades. Behind them sat a skull approaching 10 feet in length. Its rostrum was exceptionally broad and robust, giving the front of the head a structure capable of carrying heavy loads. Farther back, enlarged temporal fossae provided extensive attachment areas for the muscles involved in closing the jaws. Fossae are openings and depressions in the skull where muscle can occupy space, and in Livyatan, their proportions reveal how heavily the head was invested in producing and controlling force. No direct measurement of its bite survives, so an exact value would be speculative. The bones, nevertheless, preserve the engineering of the system. A wide skull resisted twisting. Deep tooth roots distributed pressure into the jaws. Powerful musculature could keep the mouth closed against an animal pulling in another direction. Predation at this scale was therefore less like a momentary strike and more like physical control, with predator and prey briefly joined by the bite itself. Above the jaws lay another remarkable structure. Like other sperm whales, Livyatan possessed a large basin in the skull associated with the spermaceti complex, the specialized soft tissues that occupy much of the forehead in living sperm whales. In modern species, this region participates in producing and focusing clicks used for echolocation. Livyatan's anatomy suggests that sound was probably important to its sensory world as well, potentially allowing it to detect and track animals when vision was limited by depth, suspended sediment, or low light. A more speculative possibility gives the same structure a physical role. Researchers have long debated whether the enlarged forehead of sperm whales can also help during ramming or combat between members of the same species. Livyatan's massive facial architecture has encouraged similar proposals. Fossils cannot demonstrate that it deliberately struck prey with its head, and the idea remains uncertain. But the skull was robust enough to invite consideration of close contact behaviors beyond biting alone. This separates its predatory design from megalodons in a fundamental way. The shark's anatomy favored rapid approach, a damaging bite, withdrawal, and the disabling consequences of severe tissue loss. Livyatan carried equipment suited to remaining beside its prey. Its jaws could grip while its body supplied leverage, allowing repeated bites and controlled tearing during a prolonged encounter. For prey approaching the whale's own dimensions, that distinction mattered. A struggling cetacean could twist, accelerate, dive, or strike back, loading the jaws from changing angles. Livyatan's unusually heavy cranial construction gave those forces somewhere to travel, from tooth to jaw, through the skull, and into the neck and body behind it. There was no need for distance once contact had been made. Teeth, jaw muscles, skull reinforcement, and a powerful mammalian body worked together around the same intimate problem, holding something large enough to resist. Livyatan was not merely equipped to wound substantial prey. Its anatomy was organized around staying attached while the struggle continued. A hunt changes when information arrives before contact. For Livyatan, the greatest advantage carried into the water may not have been visible in its teeth or jaws at all. It was the mammalian nervous system behind them, processing sound, movement, memory, and behavior through a brain descended from tens of millions of years of cetacean evolution. Megalodon possessed formidable senses of its own. Like living sharks, it almost certainly used olfaction, the lateral line system, vision, and electroreception. Tiny sensory organs around a shark's head can detect electrical fields produced by muscle and nerve activity, while the lateral line registers pressure changes and movement through surrounding water. These systems make modern predatory sharks remarkably sensitive hunters. Megalodon inherited versions of that ancient sensory architecture on a vastly larger body. Livyatan approached perception differently. Its closest living ecological comparisons are found among toothed whales, animals whose brains process complex acoustic information and, in many species, social communication. Modern sperm whales possess the largest brains by mass known among living animals, weighing around 17 pounds in large adults. Their enormous heads also contain the spermaceti complex, which participates in producing and focusing powerful clicks. Those clicks allow sperm whales to construct an acoustic picture of surroundings where vision becomes ineffective. Sound travels outward, strikes an object, and returns carrying information about distance, direction, and structure. A hunting whale can therefore detect prey in darkness at great depth without relying on reflected light. Claims that sperm whale clicks routinely stun prey remain unconfirmed, but their echolocation is unquestionably capable of locating and tracking animals under conditions where sight alone would offer little help. The cranial basin of Livyatan indicates that a substantial spermaceti complex occupied its head as well. Exactly how sophisticated its echolocation was cannot be recovered from fossil bone, yet its membership among toothed whales makes acoustic sensing highly plausible. For a predator pursuing large marine mammals, that sensory ability could have provided information before the jaws ever closed, especially in turbid water or at depth. An even more intriguing possibility concerns other members of its own species. Living toothed whales display some of the most elaborate social behavior found in the sea. Sperm whales form enduring social units, communicate acoustically, protect vulnerable young, and coordinate their movements. Killer whales can take this further, passing specialized hunting traditions between generations and cooperating during attacks. No fossil demonstrates that Livyatan hunted in pods, and proposed group sizes such as 8 to 11 individuals cannot presently be established from the available evidence. Fossilized skulls preserve anatomy, not hunting formations. Still, social behavior is biologically plausible for a large predatory toothed whale, and even modest cooperation would have changed the geometry of a hunt. A solitary predator must place its own body wherever pressure is needed. Several cooperating predators can divide that problem. One animal can influence direction while another approaches from elsewhere. Escape routes narrow without requiring any individual to become faster. Acoustic communication could potentially help maintain contact between animals separated by water that obscured visual cues. Megalodon may also have been behaviorally sophisticated, and describing it as governed only by size and force would underestimate living sharks, which can learn, navigate, remember locations, and alter hunting behavior. The difference was not intelligence against instinct. It was the contrast between two sensory and neurological traditions shaped by very different evolutionary histories. Livyatan carried a mammalian brain into predation at extraordinary scale, coupled with hearing specialized for an acoustic world and, potentially, the social flexibility characteristic of toothed whales. Megalodon read water through pressure, scent, vision, and electricity. Livyatan may have read much of that same water through returning sound and communication. Their weapons occupied the body. Their deeper difference lay in how each animal perceived the sea around it. The decisive principle entered the story through a glass container small enough to hold in one hand. During the early 1930s, Soviet biologist Georgy Gauss studied competition using microscopic organisms called paramecium. Among his subjects were Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudatum, two single-celled species capable of flourishing separately when supplied with suitable food. Placed together under controlled conditions, their fortunes changed. Both populations depended upon the same limited resources, but Paramecium aurelia used those resources more effectively. As the experiment continued, its population persisted, while Paramecium caudatum declined until it disappeared from the shared culture. Altering environmental conditions could change the outcome, an important detail that kept the result from becoming a universal rule of automatic extinction. From work like this emerged what became known as the competitive exclusion principle, often associated with gauze. Its meaning is precise. Two species cannot indefinitely occupy exactly the same ecological niche while depending upon exactly the same limiting resources under stable conditions. Even a slight advantage in acquiring food, reproducing, tolerating the environment, or using space can accumulate across generations. Eventually, one competitor declines, shifts into another niche, or disappears locally. Ecologist Garrett Hardin distilled the idea in 1960 into a famous phrase: complete competitors cannot coexist. The principle does not mean that every pair of predators sharing prey must drive one another extinct. Nature contains changing climates, migration, alternative foods, different hunting depths, seasonal movements, and countless opportunities for niche separation. Complete competitors are uncommon precisely because evolution and behavior often divide resources before exclusion becomes absolute. Gauss's principle is therefore less a sentence imposed upon every competitor than a boundary condition describing what happens when ecological overlap becomes sufficiently complete. That distinction matters here. Megalodon and Livyatan were not microscopic organisms sealed inside laboratory glass, and the fossil record cannot demonstrate that their niches were perfectly identical. Yet their overlap was unusually deep. Both reached the uppermost size class of marine predators. Both consumed large marine vertebrates. Both inhabited productive marine regions where cetaceans were abundant. Their enormous bodies demanded substantial energy, and much of that energy ultimately came from a prey community neither predator could create or replenish. Competition, therefore, required no physical confrontation. A whale consumed by Livyatan was unavailable to Megalodon. A successful Megalodon hunt removed biomass that could otherwise have supported another large predator. Multiply that simple exchange across populations, breeding seasons, coastlines, and thousands of generations, and competition becomes something larger than individual encounters. The important unit is no longer the animal, it is the population. If one species could survive on slightly broader prey, reproduce more successfully, tolerate a wider environment, or obtain enough food with lower energetic cost, that advantage could accumulate without either predator ever attacking the other. Adults might pass through the same waters without contact, while their populations exerted pressure upon one another through every shared meal. This is where the scale of their bodies becomes ecologically important. Giants require large flows of energy. Large flows of energy depend upon productive food webs, and even rich food webs possess limits. When two enormous predator populations draw heavily from overlapping resources, small differences in efficiency can become consequential over evolutionary time. Gauss's experiments reduced competition to its clearest form, revealing how exclusion can emerge without combat. The Miocene Sea was immeasurably more complicated, but the underlying pressure remained recognizable. Megalodon and Livyatan did not need hatred, territory, or deliberate rivalry. They needed only enough ecological overlap for the success of one population to reduce opportunities available to the other. Their most consequential weapon against each other may therefore have been neither tooth nor jaw, but appetite. The strongest version of the idea begins with a living comparison, but it must remain an analogy rather than evidence. In modern seas, killer whales have been documented hunting great white sharks. Along South Africa, specialized individuals have killed large sharks and consumed their energy-rich livers. In the Gulf of California, coordinated killer whales have also been filmed attacking juvenile white sharks, overturning them, and gaining access to the same nutrient-dense organ. These are deliberate, predatory behaviors, not merely scavenging. That modern relationship makes an ancient possibility biologically plausible. Livyatan belonged to the same broad-toothed whale radiation that produced living killer whales and sperm whales, although its exact behavior cannot be reconstructed from ancestry alone. Its skull and dentition indicate a macro-predator capable of seizing large vertebrates. Megalodon, meanwhile, was another enormous predator moving through overlapping marine ecosystems. A direct predatory relationship between them is therefore conceivable, but conception is where certainty ends. Livyatan's anatomy provides the strongest basis for the hypothesis. Its immense teeth were deeply rooted and suited to gripping substantial prey, while powerful jaws maintained contact. A large shark would have presented exactly the kind of muscular, laterally moving body that such a feeding apparatus could physically restrain. Once seized, the shark's ability to turn effectively would have been limited by its elongated body and dependence on continuous swimming. The tactical argument becomes more interesting if Livyatan sometimes hunted cooperatively. That behavior remains unknown. No fossil can tell us how many individuals approached a kill, and assigning specific pod sizes would create certainty that the evidence does not support. Yet toothed whales are capable of sophisticated cooperation, so coordinated hunting cannot be dismissed as biologically impossible. Several Livyatans surrounding a Megalodon would create a very different encounter from a duel between solitary giants. A shark built to direct its jaws forward cannot defend every side simultaneously. Multiple whales could theoretically approach from different angles, interfere with escape, and exploit openings created by one another. The comparison with killer whales and modern sharks shows that smaller cetaceans can overcome formidable elasmobranch predators through coordination and specialized behavior. There was also an ecological reason for hostility to be advantageous without making it inevitable. Megalodon could potentially threaten young whales, while Livyatan and Megalodon likely competed for some of the same marine mammals. Removing a competitor could therefore protect both food and vulnerable offspring. Modern predators sometimes kill competitors for precisely such ecological benefits, even when they do not regularly consume them. But the fossil record draws a firm boundary around this reconstruction. No authenticated Megalodon specimen bears a confirmed Livyatan bite mark. No Livyatan fossil preserves an injury demonstrably inflicted by Megalodon. No stomach contents, associated skeletons, or embedded teeth preserve a direct encounter between them. Even the suggestion that Livyatan specifically hunted Megalodon remains speculative rather than an established scientific hypothesis, supported by direct evidence. Open water makes such evidence unusually difficult to preserve. A confrontation could occur far from sediment, capable of rapidly burying remains, while cartilage, damaged tissue, and scattered carcasses would disappear readily. Absence of a fossilized encounter, therefore, cannot establish absence of encounters in life, but neither can preservation bias be used to manufacture evidence that has never been found. The ancient sea permits a possibility, not a verdict. Livyatan possessed anatomy capable of attacking very large vertebrates, and living toothed whales demonstrate that sharks can become deliberate prey for coordinated cetaceans. Whether Megalodon ever occupied that role remains unknown. Their ecological collision required no such hunt. Even if no Livyatan ever closed its jaws around a Megalodon, each predator still removed resources from a world both depended upon. Direct predation would have been one possible expression of rivalry. Competition itself needed no encounter at all. Along the southern coast of Peru, wind crosses a desert whose rocks contain an ocean. The Pisco Formation stretches through barren hills and exposed sediment, yet many of its layers accumulated beneath productive Miocene waters. Here, burial conditions preserved marine life with unusual richness, turning dry ground into one of the clearest records of a vanished ecosystem. The fossils are densely varied. Baleen whales occur beside dolphins, seals, sea turtles, fish, seabirds, and sharks. Skeletons can retain delicate anatomical details, while other remains preserve injuries and feeding traces. Instead of offering isolated fragments from widely separated habitats, Pisco captures repeated moments from communities that occupied the same coastal region through millions of years. Predator, prey, scavenger, and competitor entered the same geological archive. Livyatan came from this record. Its famous skull was recovered from deposits of the Pisco Formation, establishing that the giant raptorial sperm whale inhabited waters off ancient Peru. Megalodon is also represented there by teeth and feeding evidence associated with marine mammals. Their remains therefore belong not merely to the same epoch, but to overlapping ecosystems preserved within one sedimentary sequence. Dating those layers gives the overlap sharper boundaries. The Livyatan holotype is generally placed at roughly 9.9 to 8.9 million years old within the late Miocene. Megalodon was already widespread during this interval, and its fossils occur in contemporaneous Peruvian marine deposits. The two predators were separated neither by an ocean basin nor by a geological age. Their populations occupied the same regional food web. Whale remains make that food web tangible. Bones from the formation preserve large bite traces attributable to sharks, including marks associated with megalodon-sized teeth. Other cetacean fossils reveal the presence of large toothed whales capable of feeding on substantial vertebrate prey. Individual damaged bones cannot always identify the exact predator responsible, and claims that a single carcass records feeding by both Megalodon and Livyatan require evidence that has not yet been established. What Pisco securely preserves is both predatory lineages beside the prey communities capable of sustaining them. That distinction strengthens rather than weakens the site. Fossil ecosystems are usually assembled from incomplete pieces scattered across time and geography. Here, many pieces occur together. A baleen whale species known from one layer may be accompanied nearby by shark teeth, pinniped remains, turtles, predatory cetaceans, and the sedimentary evidence of the habitat itself. The ancient relationships remain incomplete, but their physical proximity is unusually direct. Livyatan was not confined to Peru. Isolated giant raptorial sperm whale teeth attributed to Livyatan or closely comparable forms have been reported from places including Chile, Argentina, South Africa, Australia, and other regions. Some younger material has been proposed from deposits approaching the end of the Miocene or beginning of the Pliocene, although fragmentary teeth make species-level identification and precise survival dates uncertain. The broader pattern still suggests that enormous macropredatory sperm whales ranged far beyond a single Peruvian coastline. Pisco remains exceptional because it brings so much of the ecological cast into one place. The rock preserves the prey base, the competitors, and the traces left when large animals fed upon one another. Each exposed layer is less like a portrait than a stack of overlapping records, accumulated as currents carried sediment across an inhabited seafloor. Even after millions of years, those layers retain separate pieces of lives once connected by food. Megalodon and Livyatan need no imagined meeting to be placed together there. Their fossils anchor them to the same regional marine world, drawing upon communities preserved beneath the same Peruvian desert. In geological terms, the distance between speculation and contact becomes remarkably small. The most vulnerable Livyatan in the Miocene Ocean was not an adult carrying enormous teeth. It was a calf still learning how to inhabit the body it had inherited. Like every cetacean, Livyatan would have entered the world alive rather than hatching from an egg, dependent on its mother during an early period when size, experience, and swimming ability had not yet reached their mature form. No fossilized Livyatan calf has yet revealed exactly how these young animals developed. Their birth size, nursing period, growth rate, and early behavior remain unknown. Comparisons with living sperm whales suggest prolonged maternal investment was likely, but precise details cannot safely be transferred across millions of years of evolution. What can be established is simpler. A juvenile would have been smaller than an adult, less experienced, and potentially easier for a sufficiently large predator to overpower. Megalodon was capable of exploiting such vulnerability. Fossil marine mammals preserve evidence that large sharks attacked young cetaceans. Bite marks occur on juvenile whale bones, while some remains show damage consistent with enormous shark teeth. Megalodon feeding traces have been documented on ribs, vertebrae, flippers, and other skeletal elements belonging to cetaceans of different sizes. Not every mark represents an active kill, since sharks could also scavenge carcasses, but the broader record supports predation on marine mammals, including smaller and younger individuals. For a giant shark, juveniles offered favorable economics. An adult whale could possess the speed, endurance, and mass to make an attack costly. A calf contained substantial amounts of energy in a body that was easier to disable. Young animals also tended to remain close to mothers and suitable rearing habitat, creating predictable concentrations of potential prey. That geography matters because Megalodon itself depended heavily on coastal environments during early life. Fossil assemblages, interpreted as nursery areas, have been identified in several regions, including Panama, with additional proposed nursery grounds in other warm, shallow marine settings. These protected waters offered juvenile sharks abundant smaller prey while reducing exposure to larger predators. Large whales also use sheltered or warmer regions for reproduction in many living species, although the specific birthing behavior of Livyatan remains unknown. If Livyatan followed a comparable pattern, the same broad coastal environments could have brought young whales into waters frequented by Megalodon of different ages. Such overlap would not require either species to seek the other deliberately. Geography alone could create encounters. A newborn Livyatan should not be imagined as helpless. Even young cetaceans are powerful swimmers relative to many marine animals, and maternal protection could have made approaching one dangerous. If Livyatan lived socially, additional adults might have increased that protection, although no fossil evidence establishes such group defense. Megalodon, however, needed only occasional success for predation on juveniles to matter at the population level. For a slow reproducing mammal, losing young carries consequences beyond a single death. Large cetaceans generally invest heavily in relatively few offspring, so juvenile survival strongly influences whether populations grow or contract. Even modest predation pressure can become important when births are widely spaced and young require prolonged care. The relationship between the two giants therefore extended beyond shared prey. Each could potentially affect the other's access to future generations. Livyatan may have competed with adult Megalodon for large marine mammals, while Megalodon possessed the anatomy and feeding behavior necessary to make immature predatory whales part of its own food web. Their rivalry did not have to remain between equally matched adults. It could reach into nurseries, breeding grounds, and the vulnerable years before either animal became enormous. In those younger bodies, ecological competition acquired another dimension, measured not only in meals removed from the sea, but in predators that never survived long enough to reproduce. Power at adult scale concealed a dependence that began in sheltered water. Before Megalodon could become an open ocean hunter, it had to survive years at a smaller size, and those early years appear to have been tied to particular coastlines. The fossil record preserves this dependency not in skeletons, but in concentrations of teeth left by juveniles. In 2010, researchers studying Panama's Gatun Formation described one of the clearest examples. The deposits date to roughly 10 million years ago, when the region was submerged beneath tropical marine water. Among the fossils were numerous Megalodon teeth, whose dimensions indicated young individuals rather than full-grown adults. Their concentration within a shallow coastal setting, estimated at roughly 82 feet deep, led researchers to interpret the area as a nursery. A nursery does not imply parental care. In sharks, the term describes habitat repeatedly used by juveniles because conditions improve their chances of survival. Warm, relatively shallow water can provide abundant food while limiting access for some larger predators. For a young megalodon, coastal embayments could function as protected growing grounds where the animal could feed without immediately entering the ecological world occupied by the largest adults. Other fossil assemblages have strengthened the broader pattern. Proposed megalodon nursery areas are known from the Atlantic coastal plain of North America, including Maryland, as well as Florida and the Canary Islands. Their ages differ, and not every site carries equal certainty, but the recurring association is important. Juvenile teeth repeatedly appear in warm, shallow marine environments that offered productive habitat close to shore. Young megalodons occupied a different feeding scale from mature animals. Their smaller jaws were suited to fish, turtles, and marine mammals they could overpower efficiently. Growth gradually opened access to larger prey and wider hunting grounds. Adults could range through coastal and offshore waters in pursuit of substantial cetaceans, while juveniles remained linked more strongly to habitats where manageable prey and physical shelter occurred together. That separation meant the species needed more than a productive ocean. It needed a sequence of environments. Birth had to occur where young sharks could survive. Juveniles needed sufficient food through years of growth. Only later could they join the adult population, exploiting larger marine mammals farther from protected coastal zones. A failure anywhere along that sequence would reduce the number of animals reaching reproductive maturity. For an enormous predator, this creates a vulnerability hidden by adult strength. Teeth capable of cutting through whale tissue offered no protection against the disappearance of suitable juvenile habitat. Reproduction could continue, yet offspring entering unfavorable waters would face higher mortality. If fewer survived each generation, the adult population could diminish slowly, even while mature individuals remained formidable hunters. Nursery dependence also tied Megalodon to geography in a way that mobility could not completely solve. Adults could cross great stretches of ocean, but suitable nurseries required a narrower combination of warmth, shallow depth, abundant juvenile prey, and coastal configuration. Such places were created by sea level, continental shape, currents, and climate. They could shift, fragment, expand, or vanish as those forces changed. This dependence would have mattered across generations rather than individual lifetimes. An adult might survive environmental changes for decades, while the recruitment of young sharks weakened beneath it, leaving fewer replacements entering the population year after year. The largest shark in the sea, therefore, carried an ecological requirement established when each individual was still young. Its global reach rested partly upon sheltered coastal margins scattered across that range, places where the next generation could grow before entering deeper water. Megalodon's strength belonged to the adult. Its continuity as a species belonged to the nursery. Competition becomes visible when the prey is given a body. Across the Miocene seas, both predators were drawn toward baleen whales, occupying a middle range of size, animals roughly 23 to 33 feet long. They were large enough to provide an enormous return of flesh and fat, yet small enough to be subdued by predators built for attacking other marine giants. In the same waters, the same category of whale offered nourishment to two hunters whose energetic needs were extraordinary. For Megalodon, the evidence is written directly into bone. Fossil whale ribs, vertebrae, flippers, and other remains preserve deep bite traces whose dimensions and serrated edges correspond to its teeth. Some wounds show healing, proving that at least a few whales survived an attack long enough for damaged bone to repair. Others occur on remains associated with feeding or fatal injury. Together, they place baleen whales firmly within the shark's prey spectrum rather than merely beside it in the fossil record. Livyatan leaves a different kind of evidence. No preserved feeding event identifies its preferred prey with the same certainty, yet its anatomy narrows the possibilities considerably. Enormous teeth in both jaws, a reinforced skull, powerful jaw musculature, and wear produced by repeated contact fit an animal capable of gripping substantial vertebrate prey. Related raptorial sperm whales strengthen that interpretation. Mid-sized baleen whales fall directly within the size class such equipment could exploit efficiently. The menu extended beyond whales. Seals, dolphins, sea turtles, and large fish inhabited ecosystems where both predators occurred, including the Pisco Formation. These animals could supplement a diet and may have mattered greatly to younger individuals or during favorable encounters. Yet smaller prey could not erase the energetic problem created by adult size. A predator weighing around 60 tons carries a demand that must be paid repeatedly in edible tissue. That demand becomes especially important when elevated metabolism enters the calculation. Livyatan was a mammal maintaining internal body temperature, while evidence from Megalodon suggests regional endothermy, allowing important swimming muscles and organs to remain warmer than surrounding seawater. Neither animal, therefore, resembled an enormous, sluggish feeder able to survive indefinitely on occasional scraps. Movement, hunting, digestion, growth, reproduction, and tissue maintenance all required energy, day after day. Exact feeding rates cannot be reconstructed from fossils, and pretending otherwise would give the past a precision it does not possess. The scale, however, is unavoidable. When a predator measured in tens of tons pursues prey weighing perhaps 5 to 10 tons, repeated successful kills become essential across a population and across generations. Every whale consumed removes not only one meal from the water, but an animal that took years to grow and belonged to a population reproducing far more slowly than schools of fish. Miocene baleen whales were abundant, but abundance was never infinity. Their populations occupied productive corridors shaped by temperature, currents, food availability, migration, and breeding habitat. Those same warm coastal and pelagic regions were used by Megalodon and Livyatan. Geography therefore concentrated predator and prey together, turning broad oceanic richness into local pools of finite biological energy. Here the competition acquires its sharpest form. A whale taken by Livyatan could not feed Megalodon. A whale removed by Megalodon could not sustain Livyatan. Each successful hunt slightly reduced what remained available to the other, while both populations continued demanding large, recurring meals from the same ecological account. Gauss's law no longer needs a laboratory container to make its logic visible. The container was warm Miocene water, the shared resource was large marine prey, and the pressure came from two apex predators drawing upon it simultaneously. Their coexistence depended on a prey base being replenished fast enough to support both. Once that balance narrowed, every successful kill tightened the same ecological vice. By the time the Miocene seas reached their richest expression, the abundance that had supported both giant predators was no longer expanding. Baleen whales had diversified into an extraordinary range of forms, filling coastal shelves and open marine corridors with species adapted to different feeding grounds. For Megalodon and Livyatan, This flourishing had created an unusually generous ecological foundation, yet a peak in diversity is also a boundary. Beyond it, the direction of change can only remain level or begin to fall. The fossil record suggests that the balance was already shifting during the Middle and Late Miocene. Whale communities changed unevenly from region to region, but many smaller and medium-sized archaic baleen whales that had characterized earlier seas eventually diminished as marine ecosystems reorganized. Their disappearance was not a sudden collapse visible within one lifetime. Generations of predators could have passed without encountering anything resembling a single catastrophic event. The transformation unfolded across millions of years, expressed through altered distributions, changing communities, and fewer opportunities in places that had once concentrated abundant prey. For an apex predator, such gradual change can be more consequential than its pace suggests. Large bodies require dependable feeding landscapes, not merely occasional abundance. A coastline that once supported many suitable whales could remain productive while becoming just slightly less reliable. A migration corridor could still carry prey while offering fewer encounters. Hunting grounds might continue functioning, yet the intervals between successful kills could lengthen. Each small reduction would matter more to animals whose survival depended upon repeated access to enormous meals. Megalodon and Livyatan therefore occupied an ecological system whose generosity was becoming less dependable at precisely the scale most important to them. Both could consume other marine animals, but their immense adult bodies made large prey exceptionally valuable. Mid-sized whales represented concentrated packages of muscle and energy that could justify the effort of pursuit, injury, and capture. As those prey communities shifted, the overlap between the predators became increasingly costly. The pressure did not require direct confrontation. Imagine a productive coastal region supporting enough whales for several enormous hunters. Livyatan removes one animal, and the remaining prey population becomes fractionally smaller. Megalodon succeeds elsewhere, and another disappears. Neither predator needs to recognize the other for competition to occur. Their effects meet through subtraction, written into the number of viable meals remaining in the ecosystem. This is where the competitive exclusion principle becomes especially severe. Competition intensifies when organisms share a resource that is becoming harder to obtain. During abundance, overlapping predators may persist because enough food remains after each successful hunt. As supply contracts, differences that once seemed minor begin carrying greater consequences. Hunting efficiency, energetic cost, reproductive rate, juvenile survival, geographic flexibility, and the ability to exploit alternative prey all become part of the balance. No single whale death determined the future of either lineage. The mechanism worked through accumulation. Slightly fewer prey encounters could mean longer searches. Longer searches consumed more energy. Greater energetic costs could reduce reproductive success or leave younger animals with narrower margins for survival. Across thousands of generations, small disadvantages could become population trends. The Miocene Ocean had once been rich enough to sustain two immense predators drawing from overlapping prey communities, now that biological wealth was beginning to narrow. The table had not vanished, and the whales had not disappeared, but the margin that allowed rival giants to share it was thinning. Under those conditions, every successful hunt carried an ecological consequence beyond the animal being eaten. One predator's meal became another predator's missing opportunity, and abundance slowly became competition across the same increasingly constrained feeding grounds. Extinction rarely leaves a final scene. For Livyatan, There is no last skeleton resting beside the remains of its final meal, no geological boundary marking the instant its lineage ended. Instead, the fossils become scarcer and then cease. Somewhere between roughly 9 and 5 million years ago, this immense predatory whale disappeared from the record. The broad interval reflects the incompleteness of preservation across oceans and continents, not serious doubt about the outcome. At some point within that span, a lineage once capable of challenging the largest marine predators simply stopped reproducing successfully enough to continue. Its disappearance appears closely tied to changes already moving through the whale communities beneath it. The medium-sized baleen whales that had supplied warm coastal ecosystems with abundant large prey were declining in diversity and shifting their distributions. For Livyatan, this mattered with unusual severity. Its skull was not a general-purpose feeding instrument. The immense jaws, deeply rooted teeth, and reinforced architecture were specialized for seizing substantial animals, maintaining contact, and removing flesh from prey powerful enough to resist. Such specialization can be magnificent, while the environment continues providing the resource that shaped it. When that resource contracts, the same anatomy becomes restrictive. Smaller prey offer less energy per capture and may demand different pursuit strategies. Faster animals can make an enormous predator spend more energy for a poorer return. A hunter designed around overpowering large whales cannot simply reduce its body, reshape its jaws, or lower its metabolic requirements when prey communities change within a few generations. Megalodon possessed somewhat greater dietary flexibility. Large whales remained exceptionally valuable, but fossil evidence indicates that the shark's broader feeding ecology could include smaller cetaceans, seals, sea turtles, and large fish. Its cutting dentition and highly mobile marine lifestyle allowed it to exploit a wider range of substantial vertebrates. That flexibility did not make Megalodon independent of whales, nor did it guarantee permanent survival. It merely provided more alternatives when the richest portion of the menu began thinning. Livyatan faced a narrower energetic corridor. Maintaining a massive mammalian body required continuous energy, while its most efficient prey became less dependable in the regions where it hunted. Fewer suitable whales meant longer searches and greater competition around remaining concentrations. Adults could survive individual shortages, but extinction operates through populations. Reduced feeding success can lower reproductive output. Fewer surviving mothers produce fewer calves. Young animals entering a diminished prey landscape begin life with smaller margins. Repeated across generations, abundance becomes rarity without any single catastrophic day. The timing makes this especially revealing. Livyatan appears to have declined before the major cooling and oceanographic changes associated with the later Pliocene transformation reached their strongest expression. There is therefore no need to invoke one sudden climatic disaster to explain its disappearance. A contracting prey base, intense competition, specialization, and the enormous energetic demands of its body may together have been sufficient. Natural selection does not preserve power for its own sake. It preserves traits only while those traits continue producing descendants under existing conditions. Livyatan had been shaped for an ocean rich in prey, large enough to justify its extraordinary anatomy. As that version of the ocean faded, the advantages written into its skull became increasingly expensive to maintain. Eventually, its fossils stopped. Megalodon remained. For the first time in millions of years, the great shark no longer shared its feeding world with a mammalian predator occupying so much of the same ecological space. In the narrow logic of competitive exclusion, Livyatan had fallen first. Megalodon had outlasted its closest rival and inherited what remained of their contested hunting grounds. The competition was over. Megalodon had survived Gauze's game. Yet survival was not the same as escape. For a span that may have lasted roughly 2 to 4 million years, the upper reaches of the marine food web belonged to Megalodon with little comparable opposition. Livyatan had vanished, removing the predator that had most closely matched its scale and appetite. The shark still inhabited an ocean rich with marine mammals, and the remaining prey included baleen whales, smaller cetaceans, seals, sea turtles, and large fish. What had once been divided between rival giants now offered Megalodon a wider field of opportunity. Yet, ecological victory had arrived inside an ocean already changing beneath it. Megalodon could outcompete another predator, alter its hunting grounds, and follow prey across immense distances. It could not preserve the physical conditions upon which its lineage depended. During the late Miocene, global temperatures continued a long and uneven cooling trend. This was not a sudden freeze sweeping through tropical seas. Changes accumulated gradually, sometimes interrupted by warmer intervals, while expanding polar ice altered the storage of water on land and influenced sea level. Ocean circulation also shifted as continents and seaways continued evolving. Across millions of years, coastlines were redrawn, marine habitats reorganized, and the distribution of warm water became increasingly different from the world in which Megalodon had flourished. For a predator adapted to warmer marine environments, those changes mattered at every stage of life. Adults could range through broad pelagic territories, but the species remained connected to productive coastal systems. Shallow bays and continental shelves offered younger sharks relatively protected habitat and accessible prey. As temperatures and sea levels changed, some of these environments contracted, migrated, or disappeared. The transformation occurred along margins first, removing suitable habitat piece by piece, rather than closing the entire ocean at once. The whales were changing as well. Earlier Miocene communities had contained numerous smaller and medium-sized baleen species suited to productive coastal waters. By the transition toward the Pliocene, those communities were being reorganized. Some lineages declined, others shifted their geographic ranges as feeding grounds moved. Still others belonged to evolutionary trends that eventually produced larger baleen whales capable of traveling enormous distances between seasonal feeding and breeding regions. Greater body size did not necessarily mean easier meals. A larger whale could carry more energy, but it could also migrate farther, enter colder waters, and spend less time within the warm regions most favorable to Megalodon. Prey abundance and prey accessibility were becoming separate things. Food could remain plentiful on a planetary scale, while moving beyond the places where a particular predator could exploit it efficiently. Megalodon therefore inherited supremacy at an awkward moment. Its former competitor was gone, but the ecological landscape that had sustained their rivalry was dissolving. Every generation encountered a slightly altered map. Productive waters shifted. Coastal habitats changed. Familiar prey communities became less dependable. The shark remained formidable within any individual encounter, yet evolutionary survival was determined by conditions extending far beyond the reach of teeth. This distinction separates dominance from security. An apex predator can control nearly every animal it meets while remaining dependent on temperature, sea level, reproductive habitat, and the movements of prey. Strength operates within an environment. It cannot command the environment itself. For a time, Megalodon continued through the changing seas, alone at the scale once shared with Livyatan. Its rival had disappeared, and no comparable marine hunter had replaced it. But the world supporting that supremacy was becoming cooler, more seasonal, and geographically rearranged. Megalodon had survived the competition between predators. What remained was a contest with geology, and geology did not need to hunt. The beginning of the Pliocene, around 5.3 million years ago, did not announce itself with a single boundary that animals could perceive. Water still moved through familiar basins, whales still crossed feeding grounds, and Megalodon still hunted through seas its lineage had occupied for millions of years. Yet the physical world supporting that existence was being rewritten. Cooling that had developed through earlier intervals became part of a broader climatic transition, reshaping currents, coastlines, and the geography of marine productivity. As temperatures declined, polar ice expanded, and increasing quantities of water became stored in ice sheets. Sea level responded across repeated climatic cycles. At times, substantial falls exposed portions of continental shelves that had previously lain beneath shallow seas. Some reconstructions suggest changes reaching hundreds of feet during major episodes, although the exact magnitude varied through time and region. For Megalodon, the important consequence was not a single global shoreline retreat, but the progressive instability of warm coastal habitat. Those shallow environments had served purposes that the open ocean could not simply replace. Protected bays and shelf waters provided nursery habitat for juvenile sharks, while productive coastal ecosystems concentrated manageable prey. When sea level fell, a bay could narrow, fragment, or vanish. A broad shelf could become dry land. Connections between marine basins could change, redirecting currents and altering where nutrients rose toward sunlit surface waters. Habitat loss therefore reached Megalodon through geography as much as temperature. Farther offshore, another transformation was unfolding within the prey itself. Baleen whales, surviving into the Pliocene, increasingly exploited productive waters at higher latitudes. Seasonal upwelling and nutrient-rich regions supported immense concentrations of small marine organisms, creating feeding opportunities worth migrating great distances to reach. The emerging pattern favored whales capable of traveling between breeding areas and colder feeding grounds, carrying their enormous bodies through climatic zones that Megalodon was poorly suited to occupy. The shark was not merely confined by preference. Fossil teeth reveal a distribution strongly associated with temperate and warmer seas, while convincing evidence for established populations in polar environments is lacking. Megalodon possessed physiological adaptations that probably allowed it to maintain parts of its body warmer than surrounding water, as living laminid sharks can do. But regional endothermy was not unlimited protection against cold. A giant predator still had to balance heat, oxygen, movement, digestion, and the enormous energetic cost of maintaining its body. That balance became harder as valuable prey shifted beyond favorable thermal territory. A whale entering colder water was not simply swimming farther away. It was crossing an ecological boundary that changed the cost of pursuit. Megalodon could range widely, yet following prey toward increasingly cold feeding grounds would have demanded more from a physiology shaped during a warmer marine age. Meanwhile, reproduction faced pressure from another direction. Juveniles could not solve habitat loss by behaving like adults. Their nurseries depended upon shallow coastal geography, warm water, abundant smaller prey, and some protection from larger predators. As those environments contracted or moved, suitable nursery space became less continuous. Fewer dependable nurseries meant fewer places where young sharks could survive the vulnerable years before entering broader hunting grounds. After roughly 20 million years of success, Megalodon was encountering a world in which several foundations of that success were shifting together. The prey was becoming more migratory. Productive feeding zones were extending into colder regions. Coastal nurseries were being rearranged by changing sea levels. Thermal boundaries were tightening around the waters the shark could use most efficiently. No rival predator had caused this transformation. The Pliocene Ocean itself had changed the boundaries of survival, withdrawing Megalodon's familiar world coastline by coastline, generation by generation. A narrow, tropical passage once divided two continents. For millions of years, seawater crossed this opening between the Atlantic and Pacific, carrying heat through equatorial latitudes and helping connect ocean systems that Megalodon had known throughout its existence. Then tectonic movement, volcanic construction, sediment accumulation, and changing sea level gradually transformed that passage. By roughly 3 million years ago, the Isthmus of Panama had become an effective barrier between the great ocean basins. Its closure was not an instantaneous geological door, and research continues to refine exactly when different stages of restriction occurred. Yet, by the late Pliocene, deep marine exchange through the Central American Seaway had ended. North America and South America were joined by land, while Atlantic and Pacific waters that had mingled across tropical channels were separated. For Megalodon, the significance extended far beyond Panama. Warm equatorial water could no longer move through the former seaway as before. Currents adjusted to the new continental boundary, redirecting heat and salt through different pathways. Atlantic circulation strengthened and reorganized, while conditions across the eastern Pacific changed as the connection narrowed and disappeared. The chemistry of the two basins began diverging more strongly, evidence that the oceans themselves were becoming distinct systems. Circulation governs much more than the direction water travels. It distributes heat, nutrients, dissolved gases, and salinity across enormous distances. Alter one strategic gateway, and the effects can propagate through currents thousands of miles away. The closing seaway, therefore, became part of a planetary rearrangement in how tropical warmth was transported toward higher latitudes and how deep water returned through the global ocean. At roughly the same interval, northern hemisphere glaciation intensified. The precise relationship was complex, involving atmospheric carbon dioxide, orbital cycles, ocean circulation, and other climatic processes, so the isthmus cannot be treated as a solitary switch that created the ice. Its emergence, however, altered the circulation system within which that cooling unfolded. Growing ice sheets stored more water on land, contributing to lower sea levels during colder intervals and further transforming continental margins. For a predator already dependent on warm marine habitats, these changes narrowed the available world from several directions at once. Coastal environments became increasingly unstable as shorelines shifted. Tropical and temperate currents no longer followed the older configuration. Productive ecosystems moved with changing circulation, while prey populations responded to temperature and food availability across entire basins. Megalodon could migrate, but migration only works when suitable habitat exists at the destination. It could pursue prey across immense distances, but distance could not restore a vanished seaway or recreate a lost current. Teeth could penetrate bone, muscular propulsion could accelerate an enormous body, and physiological adaptations could broaden thermal tolerance, yet none of those advantages could influence continental drift. This was geology operating on biology through the architecture of the ocean. The transformation also divided populations and ecosystems that had once been connected through tropical American waters. Marine organisms on opposite sides of the new land bridge increasingly followed separate evolutionary paths. For Megalodon, whose range had once extended through warm seas around much of the planet, the developing separation removed another piece of the interconnected marine geography that had supported its extraordinary distribution. By around 3 million years ago, the great shark was approaching the end of a lineage that had survived immense environmental change. No rival needed to defeat it in open water. No single animal needed to deliver a fatal wound. The continents had moved, the gateway had closed, circulation had reorganized, and ice was expanding across the north. The ocean remained immense, but the particular ocean Megalodon had inherited was disappearing from the earth. Extinction rarely leaves an ecological space empty for long. As Megalodon's usable range contracted, other hunters were already moving through the margins, predators requiring less food, tolerating broader conditions, and exploiting prey that had once supported something much larger. They did not need to overpower Megalodon. They only needed to function efficiently in places where the giant shark was becoming increasingly expensive to sustain. Among them was the great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias. Its body was smaller, its energetic demands correspondingly lower, and its physiology allowed successful hunting across cooler temperate waters. Great whites could pursue seals, dolphins, fish, and smaller whales without carrying the immense metabolic burden of a predator weighing many tons. In an ocean where productive habitat was shifting and large prey was becoming less dependable in warmer regions, efficiency itself became an advantage. Evidence that these sharks competed for similar food comes from chemistry preserved inside their teeth. In 2022, researchers publishing in Nature Communications analyzed zinc isotopes from fossil shark enamel. Because zinc isotope patterns change predictably through marine food webs, the chemistry can provide clues about the trophic position occupied by an animal while it was alive. Fossils from early Pliocene deposits in North Carolina produced a striking overlap. Great white sharks and Megalodon occupied comparable trophic positions, indicating that they were drawing nourishment from similar levels of the food web. Their diets were not necessarily identical, but the evidence places both predators within overlapping feeding territory. Large marine mammals available to one hunter could therefore become unavailable to the other. The pattern becomes more revealing across time. Zinc isotope evidence suggests considerable ecological flexibility among great whites, while Megalodon's trophic position varied between regions and intervals. Rather than a simple story in which one shark directly replaced another, the chemistry points toward competition occurring within an ecosystem already under pressure. A smaller predator could survive on prey portions, prey sizes, and hunting opportunities that might provide inadequate returns for its enormous competitor. Another lineage was developing along a very different evolutionary path. Early relatives within the branch that would eventually produce Orcinus, the killer whale genus, brought the advantages of mammalian physiology into increasingly cool marine environments. The earliest members were not simply miniature versions of modern killer whales, and their exact ecological roles differed from those of their descendants. Still, toothed whales were diversifying into predators capable of pursuing fish, marine mammals, and other substantial prey. Their greatest advantage lay not in individual size, but flexibility. Mammalian predators could exploit social behavior, learning, communication, and coordinated movement. More importantly, toothed whales were not bound to the same thermal geography as a giant shark associated primarily with warmer waters. As prey distributions extended into cooler regions, cetacean hunters could occupy hunting grounds increasingly removed from Megalodon's strongest habitat. Neither rival needed a decisive encounter with the old giant. A great white consuming a juvenile marine mammal was taking energy from the same ecological economy. A toothed whale pursuing prey through colder water was exploiting food beyond Megalodon's efficient reach. Repeated across populations and generations, these small advantages accumulated without requiring any dramatic confrontation. Size, once Megalodon's defining strength, had become costly. A gigantic body demanded substantial prey and productive hunting grounds. Smaller sharks could survive where resources were fragmented. Mammalian hunters could track prey through changing climates and increasingly diverse habitats. Each occupied portions of the marine world that Megalodon could no longer use as effectively. The newcomers were therefore less like conquerors than ecological successors. They expanded along boundaries already opening around a declining giant, benefiting from flexibility, lower energetic costs, broader thermal access, and new hunting strategies. Megalodon was not being defeated in battle. It was being surrounded by predators better matched to the ocean that remained. For more than 20 million years, Megalodon left behind a record almost impossible for an oceanic shark to conceal. Its skeleton was mostly cartilage, a material rarely preserved, but its jaws continually produced something harder. Teeth loosened, fell away, and were replaced throughout life. Each animal therefore scattered durable fragments of itself across the seafloor, generation after generation, wherever populations hunted and traveled. Those teeth occur across marine deposits on several continents, tracing an extraordinary geographic range through much of the Miocene and into the Pliocene. They survive where the rest of the animal vanished, sometimes isolated in sediment, sometimes associated with feeding grounds, rich in marine mammal remains. Because sharks replace teeth repeatedly, these fossils are more than anatomical specimens. Collectively, they act as a long record of presence. Near 3.6 million years ago, that record reaches its end. Modern reassessments of fossil ages have pushed supposed younger specimens back into older deposits, removing much of the evidence once used to argue that Megalodon survived deeper into the Pliocene. The most defensible extinction estimate now places its disappearance around 3.6 million years ago. After that point, securely dated occurrences vanish from the record. For an animal that continually shed teeth, this absence carries unusual weight. A surviving population would not need to leave complete skeletons for paleontologists to find. Individuals would continue losing teeth throughout their lives. Across breeding populations distributed through multiple ocean basins, the cumulative output would be immense. Currents might move individual teeth. Sediment could be reworked. Fossilization would preserve only a fraction, yet over geological time, continued survival should leave at least some securely younger material. None has been authenticated. Claims of recent Megalodon teeth have appeared repeatedly, but apparent youth is not the same as geological youth. A fossil can be eroded from an ancient layer and redeposited inside younger sediment. Mineral coatings can make specimens look fresh. Poorly documented collecting locations can sever a tooth from the stratigraphic information needed to date it. Once those problems are examined carefully, the evidence for later survival dissolves. The same limitation applies beyond teeth. No verified vertebral remains establish a younger population. No securely dated post-extinction whalebone carries a diagnostic Megalodon feeding trace that demonstrates continued survival. The fossil trail does not thin into a hidden refuge extending toward the present. It terminates within the Pliocene. That ending is striking precisely because everything before it was so persistent. For roughly 20 million years, giant megatooth sharks occupied the upper reaches of marine food webs while coastlines shifted, climates changed, prey lineages evolved, and entire communities appeared and disappeared around them. Their teeth accumulated through those transformations with remarkable continuity. Then one interval contains them, and younger deposits do not. There was no final tooth produced by the species in any literal identifiable sense within the fossil record. Somewhere, however, a last living megalodon did lose its final replacements. Somewhere, a final generation failed to produce another. Around 3.6 million years ago, the continuous geological signature ended. The water above those sediments remained full of predators and prey. Great white sharks persisted. Toothed whales diversified. Baleen whales expanded into ecological forms suited to changing currents and colder feeding grounds. Seals, dolphins, schooling fish, and other marine animals continued reshaping relationships once influenced by the enormous shark. Megalodon left no empty ocean behind. Its disappearance altered the distribution of opportunity. Energy that had once passed into a gigantic apex predator moved through other hunters, other prey, and new ecological arrangements. The last teeth mark not a fading world, but a boundary between two versions of the sea. Beyond that boundary, the ocean continued without Megalodon. Extinction rarely leaves an ecological space empty for long. As Megalodon's usable range contracted, other hunters were already moving through the margins, predators requiring less food, tolerating broader conditions, and exploiting prey that had once supported something much larger. They did not need to overpower Megalodon. They only needed to function efficiently in places where the giant shark was becoming increasingly expensive to sustain. Among them was the great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias. Its body was smaller, its energetic demands correspondingly lower, and its physiology allowed successful hunting across cooler temperate waters. Great whites could pursue seals, dolphins, fish, and smaller whales without carrying the immense metabolic burden of a predator weighing many tons. In an ocean where productive habitat was shifting and large prey was becoming less dependable in warmer regions, efficiency itself became an advantage. Evidence that these sharks competed for similar food comes from chemistry preserved inside their teeth. In 2022, researchers publishing in Nature Communications analyzed zinc isotopes from fossil shark enamel. Because zinc isotope patterns change predictably through marine food webs, the chemistry can provide clues about the trophic position occupied by an animal while it was alive. Fossils from early Pliocene deposits in North Carolina produced a striking overlap. Great white sharks and Megalodon occupied comparable trophic positions, indicating that they were drawing nourishment from similar levels of the food web. Their diets were not necessarily identical, but the evidence places both predators within overlapping feeding territory. Large marine mammals available to one hunter could therefore become unavailable to the other. The pattern becomes more revealing across time. Zinc isotope evidence suggests considerable ecological flexibility among great whites, while Megalodon's trophic position varied between regions and intervals. Rather than a simple story in which one shark directly replaced another, the chemistry points toward competition occurring within an ecosystem already under pressure. A smaller predator could survive on prey portions, prey sizes, and hunting opportunities that might provide inadequate returns for its enormous competitor. Another lineage was developing along a very different evolutionary path. Early relatives within the branch that would eventually produce Orcinus, the killer whale genus, brought the advantages of mammalian physiology into increasingly cool marine environments. The earliest members were not simply miniature versions of modern killer whales, and their exact ecological roles differed from those of their descendants. Still, toothed whales were diversifying into predators capable of pursuing fish, marine mammals, and other substantial prey. Their greatest advantage lay not in individual size, but flexibility. Mammalian predators could exploit social behavior, learning, communication, and coordinated movement. More importantly, toothed whales were not bound to the same thermal geography as a giant shark associated primarily with warmer waters. As prey distributions extended into cooler regions, cetacean hunters could occupy hunting grounds increasingly removed from Megalodon's strongest habitat. Neither rival needed a decisive encounter with the old giant. A great white consuming a juvenile marine mammal was taking energy from the same ecological economy. A toothed whale pursuing prey through colder water was exploiting food beyond Megalodon's efficient reach. Repeated across populations and generations, these small advantages accumulated without requiring any dramatic confrontation. Size, once Megalodon's defining strength, had become costly. A gigantic body demanded substantial prey and productive hunting grounds. Smaller sharks could survive where resources were fragmented. Mammalian hunters could track prey through changing climates and increasingly diverse habitats. Each occupied portions of the marine world that Megalodon could no longer use as effectively. The newcomers were therefore less like conquerors than ecological successors. They expanded along boundaries already opening around a declining giant, benefiting from flexibility, lower energetic costs, broader thermal access, and new hunting strategies. Megalodon was not being defeated in battle. It was being surrounded by predators better matched to the ocean that remained. Somewhere between certainty and possibility lies the encounter the fossils have not yet given us. Megalodon and Livyatan occupied the same ancient seas, pursued overlapping prey, and left evidence within the same broad geological settings. Yet after millions of years, buried beneath sediment, neither predator has emerged, carrying an injury that can be confidently attributed to the other. No authenticated Megalodon fossil bears a confirmed Livyatan bite. No known Livyatan specimen preserves damage that researchers can securely identify as the work of Megalodon. Teeth, vertebrae, skull fragments, and wounded prey reveal much about their lives, but the decisive trace of predator against predator remains absent. Scientific reconstruction therefore reaches a boundary here. Ecological overlap is supported, direct combat is not. That distinction matters because fossils sometimes preserve astonishingly specific violence. Tyrannosaurus rex bones have been found with tooth marks matching other members of their own species, including injuries showing evidence of healing. Mosasaurs likewise left traces of attacks on other mosasaurs, allowing paleontologists to recognize conflicts that occurred within their marine world. Shark bites can survive as grooves and punctures on the vertebrae or skeletal remains of other sharks. Under favorable circumstances, an encounter lasting moments can become readable millions of years later. The missing evidence between Megalodon and Livyatan does not establish that they avoided one another. Fossilization records only a tiny fraction of ancient life, and its filters are severe. An animal must die under suitable conditions, escape destruction by scavengers and currents, become buried, survive geological alteration, remain accessible near the surface, and finally be discovered. Even then, damage must preserve enough anatomical detail for researchers to identify what produced it. Open water makes that chain especially fragile. Two immense, mobile predators meeting far from depositional environments could leave no lasting geological trace at all. A bitten animal might survive and travel hundreds of miles before dying. A carcass could sink into deep water where bones dissolved, scattered, or disappeared beneath sediment beyond human reach. Even a preserved wound might lack the tooth fragments or distinctive geometry needed to assign its maker with confidence. What survives instead is evidence of proximity. Fossil deposits place both predators within overlapping marine regions during the Miocene. Their remains occur in geological contexts containing many of the cetaceans they hunted. Whale bones preserve large bite traces consistent with attacks by giant sharks, while other feeding evidence and Livyatan's formidable skull and teeth support predation upon substantial marine mammals. The ecological paths of these hunters crossed even when their bodies have not been found, bearing each other's signatures. Few places preserve that vanished world as richly as the Pisco Formation of Peru. Its desert sediments contain whales, dolphins, seals, sharks, seabirds, turtles, and predatory cetaceans with exceptional detail. Livyatan itself entered science from these deposits, its enormous skull retaining evidence of an animal unlike any living sperm whale. Excavation continues across exposures where erosion steadily reveals new portions of ancient seafloor. That continuing work keeps the encounter unresolved rather than closed. A damaged vertebra, a fractured jaw, an embedded tooth, or a skull carrying a recognizable bite pattern could alter the evidence with a single discovery. Such a specimen would need careful dating and anatomical comparison before any claim of direct conflict could stand. For now, the most accurate image contains restraint. Megalodon and Livyatan shared prey, geography, and geological time closely enough for encounters to have been possible, perhaps inevitable, across countless generations. Whether one ever closed its jaws upon the other remains beyond confirmation. Their world has preserved the conditions for confrontation, but not the confrontation itself. Somewhere in the exposed hills of Peru, another fragment of that world may already be entering daylight, carrying an answer that science has not yet learned to read. The empty places at the top of an ecosystem are rarely inherited by creatures that resemble what came before. After Megalodon and Livyatan disappeared, the oceans did not rebuild their former hierarchy with slightly smaller versions of the same giants. The successful predators of the colder world followed different paths, carrying traits suited to movement, cooperation, dietary flexibility, and habitats that their predecessors could no longer exploit. Among marine mammals, the lineage leading toward modern killer whales offered one answer. Members of Orcinus eventually occupied an apex role across waters ranging from temperate coasts to polar seas. Their strength was distributed across the group rather than concentrated entirely within one enormous body. Coordinated hunting allowed several animals to surround prey, divide tasks, and alter tactics during an attack. Social learning added another advantage. Effective techniques could pass between individuals and generations, turning experience itself into a survival tool. Cold tolerance widened the map available to them. As productive feeding grounds shifted into higher latitudes, killer whales could follow seals, fish, and cetaceans into regions inaccessible to warm, adapted giant sharks. Different populations also developed distinct diets and hunting traditions. One group could specialize in fish, while another pursued marine mammals, reducing dependence on a single prey community. Their ecological power came from behavioral range as much as anatomy. The descendants of Livyatan's broader sperm whale family survived through an almost opposite transformation. Modern sperm whales abandoned the raptorial hunting style represented by their ancient relative. Their teeth became concentrated mainly in the lower jaw, while suction became central to capturing prey. Instead of pursuing large whales near the surface, they descended into darkness after squid and deep-dwelling fish. That shift opened an enormous feeding realm beyond the coastal ecosystems that had become increasingly unstable. Modern sperm whales can descend beyond 7,000 feet, carrying oxygen within blood and muscle, while their bodies tolerate immense pressure. Long dives place them among the deepest diving large animals alive. Their survival was not a continuation of Livyatan's ecological strategy. It represented departure from it, exchanging a contested surface niche for prey distributed through the deep ocean. Great white sharks inherited another portion of the predatory landscape. They never approached Megalodon's extreme size, yet smaller bodies brought advantages under changing conditions. Great whites require less total food, mature within an ecological system supporting more modest energetic demands, and can pursue prey across broad temperate ranges. Their diet includes fish, rays, smaller sharks, seals, sea lions, dolphins, and carrion, with feeding patterns changing through growth and opportunity. Regional endothermy also helps great whites maintain parts of their bodies above surrounding water temperature, supporting active hunting in cooler seas. This does not make them unrestricted by temperature, but it gives them access to environments beyond the warm coastal world that had favored Megalodon. Speed, mobility, and dietary breadth became more useful than simply carrying the largest possible jaws. These inheritors, therefore, occupied an ocean whose definition of advantage had changed. Killer whales used cooperation and learned behavior. Sperm whales moved downward into a vast three-dimensional hunting space. Great whites remained comparatively compact and opportunistic. None needed to defeat Megalodon or Livyatan in combat to inherit portions of their ecological influence. Evolution had no throne waiting for a single successor. What remained were opportunities scattered through cold currents, deep basins, seasonal migrations, and changing food webs. The predators that endured were those able to move among those opportunities without depending completely upon one vanished arrangement of climate and prey. Power had once been expressed through extraordinary scale. In the ocean that followed, flexibility became its more lasting form. The disappearance of a predator can remain visible long after its teeth are gone, not as an empty space, but in the bodies of the animals that outlived it. Among baleen whales, the generations following the Pliocene brought a remarkable change in scale. Several surviving lineages began producing giants far beyond the typical dimensions of their Miocene relatives, eventually giving the modern ocean animals larger than anything known from earlier seas. This expansion did not happen immediately after Megalodon's extinction around 3.6 million years ago, nor can it be attributed to a single cause. Whale gigantism appears to have intensified during the later Pliocene and Pleistocene as ocean productivity became increasingly concentrated in seasonal feeding grounds. Stronger upwelling, changing currents, and the expansion of nutrient-rich polar ecosystems created dense patches of small prey. Baleen feeding made it possible to harvest these concentrations efficiently, rewarding animals capable of traveling long distances and processing immense quantities of food. Predation pressure may also have been part of that changing evolutionary landscape. Megalodon had spent millions of years hunting marine mammals, and large whales occupied the prey spectrum available to it. Once that enormous shark disappeared, one source of extreme predatory pressure vanished with it. The surviving whales entered an ocean where the risks surrounding greater body size were different, even as climate and food distribution increasingly favored long migrations and enormous feeding capacity. Scientists cannot demonstrate that removing Megalodon directly caused whales to become gigantic. The timing is suggestive, but evolution rarely leaves such a simple chain of cause and effect. Changes in productivity, prey density, migration, competition, heat conservation, and predation all interacted. What can be said more securely is that the greatest baleen whale sizes arose after Megalodon was gone, within ecological conditions unlike those that had governed most of its reign. The result eventually appeared in lineages familiar today. Fin whales became immense ocean travelers. Humpback whales combined substantial size with migrations spanning thousands of miles. Most extraordinary of all, the blue whale lineage reached dimensions unmatched anywhere in the known history of animal life. The largest individuals can approach 100 feet in length and weigh close to 200 tons, exceeding even the greatest dinosaurs in confirmed body mass. At that scale, the relationship between hunter and prey changes. An adult blue whale carries tremendous momentum, thick tissues, and a body whose sheer dimensions make a successful attack extraordinarily demanding. Modern killer whales can attack blue whales cooperatively, demonstrating that gigantism does not create absolute immunity. Yet a solitary macropredator attempting to disable such prey would face risks unlike those involved in hunting the smaller whales, common during much of the Miocene. There is therefore something revealing in the sequence preserved by time. The age of giant whale hunting predators ended, while the age of the largest baleen whales was only beginning. One ecological ceiling weakened as another set of environmental pressures encouraged greater size. Over succeeding generations, that altered balance became written directly into whale anatomy. Modern oceans preserve the outcome. Their greatest animals are not relics from some older age of universal gigantism. They are comparatively recent evolutionary achievements shaped during a world from which Megalodon and Livyatan had already disappeared. The blue whale swimming through today's seas belongs to an ecosystem constructed from that absence as much as from the species that survived it. Its immense body carries a record of changed currents, concentrated food, altered predation, and millions of years of opportunity. The ocean did not simply continue after its ancient giants vanished. In their absence, a different kind of giant became possible. There was no prophecy in the Miocene ocean, no hidden design waiting to remove its greatest hunters. What existed instead was something less dramatic and more relentless: ecology. Once Livyatan and Megalodon occupied overlapping seas, pursued overlapping prey, and demanded immense quantities of energy from the same marine system, their coexistence carried a cost. That cost accumulated through generations, measured not in a single confrontation, but in meals missed, juveniles unfed, territories depleted, and reproductive opportunities lost. In that sense, yes, their destruction was destined, not by fate, and not because either animal possessed some flaw that guaranteed extinction from the beginning. The inevitability came from competitive exclusion. Gauss's law describes a basic ecological limit. Two species cannot indefinitely occupy the same niche while depending upon the same limiting resources under stable conditions. Eventually, some difference must separate them, or one competitor must decline. Livyatan and Megalodon were not perfectly identical predators, but their ecological demands overlapped enough for competition to become consequential when the abundance and distribution of large marine mammals began changing. Their rivalry therefore required no final battle. Every whale taken by one predator became energy unavailable to the other. Every productive hunting ground supported only so much biomass. Every successful adult represented years of feeding that had to continue before another generation could replace it. Multiplied across populations and millions of years, competition became a pressure far larger than any individual encounter. The predators could damage one another simply by remaining successful at the same time. Livyatan appears to have yielded first. Somewhere between 9 and 5 million years ago, its record fades as the medium-sized whales, suited to its specialized raptorial feeding, became less dependable across warm coastal ecosystems. Its enormous jaws and gripping teeth had evolved for a particular kind of predation, magnificent while that ecological arrangement endured, costly when it did not. Megalodon possessed greater dietary flexibility, and for a time, that flexibility allowed the shark to remain after its mammalian rival had vanished. Victory, however, did not restore the world that had supported them both. Cooling continued, sea level changed, nursery habitat contracted, whale communities reorganized, productive feeding grounds shifted toward colder waters, and new competitors entered portions of the remaining food web. Megalodon survived the first great subtraction, then inherited an ecosystem whose foundations were moving beneath it. By roughly 3.6 million years ago, its teeth disappear from reliably dated deposits. After around 20 million years of existence, its lineage ended as well. The sequence matters. Livyatan did not kill Megalodon, and Megalodon did not need to kill Livyatan. Their shared pressure operated through the prey beneath them, while geological and climatic change steadily reduced the ecological room available for predators of such extraordinary scale. Competition weakened resilience. Specialization narrowed options. Environmental transformation then made recovery increasingly difficult. Both animals had been products of abundance. The Miocene ocean could generate enough marine mammal biomass to support a macro-predatory sperm whale with enormous teeth and a shark of unprecedented size within overlapping regions. Yet the conditions capable of building such predators were never guaranteed to persist. When those conditions changed, immense bodies became immense requirements, and dominance became dependence on an ecosystem that was disappearing. So the title was never mythology disguised as science. They were destined to destroy each other only in the ecological sense, through competition compounded across deep time until coexistence became increasingly unsustainable. Gauss's law needed no duel, no victor standing over a defeated rival, and no fossil preserving the final moment. Its signature lies instead in two vanished lineages, two architectures of extraordinary teeth, and an ocean that ultimately could sustain neither. Across the immense span of Earth's history, the Miocene stands apart for a combination that appears nowhere else. Other seas produced formidable hunters, and other ages pushed marine bodies toward enormous scale. Yet only this interval placed two macro-predators of extraordinary size into overlapping ecological space, each capable of attacking large marine mammals, each demanding vast stores of energy, and each operating near the summit of the same food web. The Cretaceous had already demonstrated how imposing ocean predators could become. Mosasaurs reached exceptional lengths. Plesiosaurs occupied diverse predatory roles, and large sharks moved through seas rich with reptiles, fish, and ammonites. Their ecosystems were complex, but they did not reproduce the particular pairing that emerged much later. None combined the size, mammal-centered prey base, geographic overlap, and comparable apex position represented by Megalodon and Livyatan. Ancient oceans had giants before them, but not this ecological symmetry at such scale. Nothing after them restored it either. Pliocene cooling reshaped marine habitats. The Pleistocene intensified the influence of glacial cycles, and the modern ocean inherited predator communities built around different advantages. Killer whales hunt cooperatively. Great white sharks combine speed with broad dietary flexibility. Sperm whales descend into deep water after squid, rather than pursuing large whales near the surface. Powerful predators remain, but the paired extremity of the Miocene has never returned. The conditions that created it were themselves unusual. Beginning around 23 million years ago, the Miocene developed extensive warm marine environments alongside a remarkable radiation of whales and other marine mammals. Baleen whales diversified into numerous forms. Toothed whales occupied expanding niches, and coastal ecosystems supported dense networks of prey. Across millions of years, that biological abundance provided enough energy for natural selection to sustain predators whose adult lives required enormous caloric returns. One lineage answered through the body of a shark, refining a predatory design already tested across deep evolutionary time until Megalodon reached exceptional proportions. Another answered through a mammal, transforming the sperm whale lineage into Livyatan, armed with immense functional teeth in both jaws and a skull suited to seizing substantial prey. Evolution arrived at two different anatomical solutions to the same ecological opportunity. That opportunity did not last. The Miocene began approximately 23 million years ago, but the extraordinary overlap existed only while climate, geography, prey diversity, and productive coastal habitats remained aligned. In functional terms, the window began closing as those relationships changed and Livyatan disappeared. Megalodon persisted beyond its rival, yet the ecological arrangement that had allowed both giants to coexist was already gone. Seen against roughly 4.5 billion years of Earth history, the interval becomes remarkably narrow. Continents have assembled and separated. Ocean basins have opened and vanished. Mass extinctions have erased entire communities, while evolutionary radiations have filled the resulting space with unfamiliar forms. Through all of that change, the particular experiment represented by these two predators appears to have happened once. Even today's largest marine animals do not recreate it. Modern blue whales exceed either predator in mass, but they are filter feeders supported by concentrated swarms of small prey. Modern apex hunters operate at smaller individual scale, often compensating through mobility, cooperation, intelligence, or dietary breadth. The present ocean remains rich in giants, yet its predatory architecture follows another pattern. The Miocene, therefore, represents more than an age containing two famous animals. It marks an ecological extreme, a rare convergence in which warmth, productivity, prey abundance, and evolutionary opportunity briefly supported two enormous rival hunters at once. When that convergence dissolved, Earth retained no equivalent. The seas surrounding us belong to its aftermath, carrying descendants of that ancient world without ever rebuilding the extraordinary arrangement that once placed Megalodon and Livyatan in the same ocean. Along the southern coast of Peru, the desert is still giving the Miocene back to the surface. Wind passes over pale hills where layers of sediment lie exposed beneath an almost rainless sky. Those layers were not always dry ground. Millions of years ago, they accumulated beneath a warm, productive sea, crowded with whales, sharks, fish, seabirds, and other marine life. Today, erosion works through that vanished seafloor grain by grain, revealing bones that have remained enclosed since the animals themselves disappeared. The Pisco Formation has preserved that lost ecosystem with unusual richness. Whale skeletons emerge from slopes in partial articulation. Ribs project from weathered sediment. Vertebrae appear beside fragments of skull, while isolated teeth remain scattered through deposits that once received the remains of animals sinking through seawater. Among them are the unmistakable teeth of Megalodon, recovered in abundance from the same broad geological archive that preserves the marine mammals it hunted. Livyatan entered science through one of those improbable moments when discovery depends upon where someone happens to look. In 2008, during a field expedition in Peru, researchers were approaching the end of their work when Klaus Post noticed a large fossil exposed in the desert. It could easily have remained part of the hillside. Instead, excavation revealed an enormous sperm whale skull armed with immense teeth, the specimen that would establish Livyatan melvillei as one of the most formidable predatory whales known from the fossil record. That skull changed the meaning of the surrounding sediments. Megalodon was no longer the only extraordinary macro-predator known from these waters. Two immense hunters had occupied the same marine region during overlapping stretches of time, while nearby deposits preserved the whales, forming much of their potential prey. Yet the most compelling detail remains what the formation has not yielded. No confirmed specimen currently preserves a direct physical encounter between Livyatan and Megalodon. The desert continues to expose fragments rather than complete histories. A rib may carry grooves left by teeth, but identifying the animal responsible can require careful comparison. A detached tooth may establish presence without recording behavior. A damaged skull may preserve injuries whose origin cannot be determined with confidence. Fossilization captures only a tiny fraction of ancient life, and each surviving object reaches the present through an improbable chain of burial. Mineralization, geological survival, exposure, recognition, and excavation. Every new specimen, therefore, adjusts the boundary between evidence and inference. Field teams working through the Pisco deposits continue finding cetacean remains, shark teeth, bones-bearing, feeding traces, and anatomical details that refine the reconstruction of this ecosystem. Most discoveries add small pieces rather than overturning entire interpretations. Occasionally, however, a single fossil can alter the cast of an ancient ocean, just as one exposed skull did when Livyatan was recognized. Somewhere within those layered hills, a more decisive trace may already exist. It could be a megalodon tooth lodged within the bone of a predatory sperm whale, or a Livyatan bite pattern preserved on remains attributable to the giant shark. Such preservation would be exceptionally rare, but rarity is different from impossibility. The necessary sediment has survived, and erosion is still opening surfaces that no human being has examined. For now, the desert keeps the final boundary intact. Megalodon and Livyatan shared an ocean, shared prey, and left their remains within the same remarkable geological landscape. Their direct meeting remains beyond confirmation. Beneath the Peruvian hills, however, the fossil record is not a completed book. It is stone still being opened, one weathered edge at a time, waiting for another researcher to notice what almost remained buried. The story left by Megalodon and Livyatan becomes smaller, in one sense, when stripped of the scale surrounding them. Beneath the enormous teeth, the immense bodies, and the vanished seas lies a principle that governs every living thing. Life exists inside boundaries. However abundant an ecosystem becomes, however successful a lineage appears, there is always a limit to the energy a world can provide, and to the forms that energy can sustain. The Miocene Ocean approached those boundaries in extraordinary ways. Warm waters supported flourishing communities of marine mammals, fish, sharks, seabirds, and countless smaller organisms whose productivity ultimately fed everything above them. From that abundance emerged predators pushed toward exceptional scale. Megalodon and Livyatan were different evolutionary experiments, yet both depended upon the same fundamental wealth flowing upward through the food web. Their size was evidence of opportunity, but also of dependence. A large predator carries its requirements everywhere. Muscle must be fueled, growth must be sustained, reproduction must succeed often enough to replace adults that die. Young animals must find habitats where they can feed without facing demands meant for mature bodies. When prey is plentiful, those costs can disappear beneath abundance. When ecosystems contract, the same traits that once represented strength become obligations that cannot simply be set aside. This is where evolutionary success separates from ecological permanence. Natural selection does not prepare organisms for every world that might someday exist. It shapes them within conditions already surrounding them, favoring traits that work well enough in the present to leave descendants. A body exquisitely suited to one environment may therefore become increasingly mismatched when currents shift, temperatures change, coastlines retreat, or prey communities reorganize. Nothing about former dominance grants exemption from that process. Megalodon and Livyatan reached their extraordinary forms because the Miocene allowed those forms to work. Their anatomy was not mistaken. Their success across immense spans of time proves otherwise. Yet, specialization always contains an assumption about tomorrow. It assumes, without intention or foresight, that enough of yesterday's world will remain. For these predators, that assumption eventually failed. The change was slow enough that no individual animal could have perceived its full direction. Generations were born into oceans only slightly different from those of their ancestors. A productive region weakened here. A prey population shifted elsewhere. A nursery became less reliable. A colder current reached farther into familiar water. Across a lifetime, such differences might have seemed ordinary. Across millions of years, they redrew the conditions under which gigantic predators could exist. Their disappearance, therefore, carries no moral and requires no image of nature correcting an excess. They were not too powerful for the world, nor were they punished for reaching some forbidden scale. They simply occupied ecological positions whose costs became harder to meet as the planet changed around them. Geology moved without regard for the organisms shaped by the previous arrangement. That may be the deepest limit preserved in their fossils. Evolution can produce astonishing precision, but it cannot make permanence. The environment that selects a successful form is itself temporary, assembled from climate, geography, chemistry, currents, prey, competitors, and chance. Every adaptation belongs, in some measure, to a passing version of Earth. Megalodon and Livyatan lived near the outer edge of what their ocean could support, magnificent expressions of conditions that briefly aligned. By the time their lineages reached their greatest ecological presence, those conditions were already beginning to loosen. Even immense strength could not preserve the circumstances that created it. The world did not suddenly reject them. It changed beneath them, gradually, generation after generation, until extraordinary adaptation was no longer enough to remain. Long before any whale carried teeth through the open ocean, predation had already been passing from one body plan to another. In Paleozoic seas, large, straight-shelled nautiloid relatives became formidable hunters, while later sea scorpions, called eurypterids, produced species stretching beyond 8 feet. Their worlds lasted for immense spans, yet neither lineage retained its place forever. The seas changed, competitors changed, and forms that once seemed perfectly fitted to their surroundings eventually disappeared or retreated into smaller descendants. By the late Devonian, another experiment had reached the upper levels of marine food webs. Dunkleosteus wore heavy armor across its head and thorax, and instead of ordinary teeth, sharpened plates of bone formed cutting edges at the front of its jaws. Biomechanical studies suggest those jaws could open in roughly 1/50th of a second, creating rapid suction as they closed upon prey. Its lineage flourished for only a fraction of geological time before the Devonian extinction crises removed it. Armor that had served one ocean offered no guarantee in the next. Much later, the late Cretaceous belonged to marine reptiles of extraordinary variety. Mosasaurs spread through seas across the planet, occupying predatory roles from specialized hunters to immense macro-predators. Tylosaurus could approach 45 feet in length, carrying a streamlined body through waters shared with sharks, turtles, fish, and diving birds. Then, around 66 million years ago, an asteroid impact initiated a planetary catastrophe. Darkness, disrupted food webs, and environmental upheaval followed. Nonavian dinosaurs vanished on land, and mosasaurs disappeared from the sea. Even mammals eventually inherited shapes that seemed almost unimaginable for creatures descended from terrestrial ancestors. During the Eocene, Basilosaurus reached roughly 60 feet, its elongated vertebral column giving the animal a serpentine profile unlike that of modern whales. It hunted large fish and other marine mammals in warm seas. Its reign also ended. The lineage vanished as ocean circulation, climate, prey communities, and whale evolution continued moving beyond the conditions under which it had prospered. Then came Megalodon. Later, Livyatan shared part of its world. Their enormous teeth marked another peak in the long history of marine predation, one built not from armor or reptilian ancestry, but from a gigantic shark and a raptorial whale exploiting exceptional marine abundance. They too became temporary occupants of the summit. Their fossils remain, while their ecological positions have passed onward. The modern ocean has its own inheritors. Great white sharks patrol productive margins. Killer whales combine speed, social cooperation, learned hunting traditions, and remarkable dietary flexibility. Sperm whales descend into deep water after prey, inaccessible to most large predators. None represents an endpoint. They are simply the living arrangement produced by present conditions, as temporary on geological scales as every arrangement before them. Seen across hundreds of millions of years, ocean supremacy becomes less like a throne and more like a moving boundary. Evolution repeatedly reaches toward whatever opportunities climate, geography, oxygen, productivity, and prey make available. A lineage expands into that space, becomes specialized within it, and may dominate for millions of years. Yet the environment never signs a permanent contract. Continents continue drifting, seaways open and close, temperatures rise and fall, currents reorganize, coastlines migrate, and food webs acquire new participants. Against those changes, even the most successful predator remains attached to a particular version of the planet. No creature escapes that condition through strength, size, intelligence, armor, speed, or teeth. The ocean has never kept a permanent king because the ocean itself has never remained the same kingdom. Megalodon and Livyatan belong to an ancient procession rather than an exception. What finally overtakes every ruler is larger than any rival. It is time, carrying the world from one set of possibilities into another. The modern ocean is not a restored version of some older balance. It is an inheritance, assembled from vacancies, surviving lineages, altered climates, and evolutionary opportunities that appeared when the great Miocene predators vanished. Megalodon and Livyatan no longer move through its waters, yet the ecological world that followed their disappearance still carries their outline. Absence, over millions of years, can become as biologically consequential as presence. Consider the blue whale, reaching around 100 feet and weighing as much as 200 tons. It represents the greatest confirmed body size attained by any animal in Earth history. Its gigantism arose long after the marine predator communities of the Miocene had been dismantled. Scientists generally connect the evolution of enormous baleen whales to changes in ocean productivity, seasonal feeding grounds, and increasingly concentrated prey during the Pliocene and Pleistocene. Reduced pressure from giant macro-predatory sharks may also have widened the evolutionary space available to whales, becoming larger. Megalodon's disappearance did not single-handedly create the blue whale, but it removed one formidable constraint from the seas in which extreme whale gigantism later evolved. Sperm whales preserve a different kind of inheritance. Their lineage survived, but not by maintaining the ecological strategy represented by Livyatan. Modern sperm whales pursue squid and other prey far beneath the surface, routinely descending thousands of feet and sometimes approaching 7,000 feet or more. Their bodies carry adaptations for prolonged breath holding, pressure tolerance, echolocation, and movement through darkness. Instead of remaining giant surface macropredators armed for attacking large marine mammals, they entered a vast three-dimensional hunting space unavailable to Megalodon. Survival came through ecological departure into depths where an older predator could not readily follow. Killer whales embody another solution. Their strength is distributed across more than anatomy. Social groups cooperate. Hunting techniques can be learned and transmitted. Diets vary between populations, and individuals can pursue prey through waters ranging from productive coasts to polar seas. Such flexibility became especially valuable as later oceans cooled and marine ecosystems reorganized. Where enormous specialists depended heavily upon particular prey communities and habitats, killer whales could alter behavior without waiting for major anatomical evolution. Even the great white shark reflects this transformed world. Smaller than Megalodon, capable of exploiting varied prey, and able to use cooler waters, it occupies an apex shark role without reproducing the extreme scale of its predecessor. Modern marine dominance is divided among several strategies rather than concentrated in predators resembling the immense specialists of the Miocene. This makes the present sea an ecological record written in living bodies. Blue whales express what became possible as baleen whale gigantism accelerated. Sperm whales reveal how one branch of predatory whales found success far below the old surface hunting grounds. Killer whales demonstrate the power of cooperation, learning, and dietary breadth. Great white sharks show how a smaller macro-predator can remain formidable while demanding less from any single ecosystem. None of these animals is simply a replacement for Megalodon or Livyatan. Evolution does not refill an empty role with an identical occupant. It works with surviving lineages, inherited anatomy, changing environments, and whatever opportunities remain. The result is a sea whose largest creatures and most capable hunters belong to ecological arrangements that emerged after the older order dissolved. Millions of years have passed since those enormous teeth stopped entering marine sediments, but extinction did not erase their influence. It redirected evolution around the spaces they left open. The ocean surrounding us is therefore not merely a world without Megalodon and Livyatan. In part, it is a world shaped by the fact that they are gone. For 3.5 billion years, the ocean has been conducting the same experiment. Its waters have changed chemistry, depth, temperature, circulation, and shape. Continents have assembled and separated around it. Entire ecosystems have risen inside it, flourished for ages, and disappeared. Through every transformation, one principle has remained. Life expands into whatever conditions permit, and no adaptation can survive indefinitely after those conditions cease to exist. Ancient seas produced great nautiloid hunters, followed by enormous sea scorpions and armored fishes. Later oceans carried mosasaurs, basilosaurid whales, megalodon, and Livyatan. Each lineage occupied a world that temporarily supported its particular form of success. None received permanence. Their disappearance required no intention from nature, no judgment, and no preference for whatever followed. The physical world simply continued changing, and biology remained bound to it. That same process reached an extraordinary expression during the Miocene. Marine productivity and abundant prey supported two immense macro-predators whose ecological requirements overlapped. Megalodon approached the limits available to a predatory shark. Livyatan carried the same escalation through a mammalian body, combining enormous teeth with the energetic demands of an active whale. For a time, the ocean could sustain both. Yet, abundance is never an unlimited resource. Every animal draws energy from a network beneath it, and the largest predators depend upon especially broad foundations. When those foundations contract, competition becomes more consequential, even without direct confrontation. Fewer suitable prey animals mean fewer calories distributed among predators whose bodies cannot simply become inexpensive to maintain. Reproduction becomes harder to sustain. Juveniles enter a less forgiving environment. Populations thin across generations rather than collapsing in a single dramatic instant. This is where the ecological principle associated with Georgie gauze becomes relevant. Complete competitors cannot indefinitely occupy the same ecological niche while relying upon the same limiting resource under stable conditions. One may shift its behavior or diet. One may retreat geographically. One may decline until competition effectively ends. The principle does not require combat between individuals. It operates through access to energy, survival, reproduction, and the accumulated arithmetic of generations. Megalodon and Livyatan therefore did not need a final encounter for their shared existence to matter. Their overlap placed both within an ecological equation larger than either predator. As marine conditions changed and prey communities reorganized, the extraordinary abundance that had helped produce them became harder to depend upon. Livyatan disappeared first. Megalodon persisted longer, until its own combination of enormous size, habitat requirements, prey dependence, and changing climate could no longer be maintained. Their teeth remain embedded in marine sediments because mineralized remains can outlast the ecosystems that created them. A tooth survives without preserving hunger, competition, migration, failed reproduction, or the countless ordinary pressures through which extinction actually unfolds. Those processes must be reconstructed from patterns spread across rocks, fossils, chemistry, geography, and evolutionary relationships. What emerges is not a story of nature choosing winners. It is something more fundamental. The ocean builds according to opportunity. It sustains according to available energy. When climate, geography, prey, and competition alter the boundaries of possibility, life must alter with them or disappear. That law has never stopped operating. It surrounds every living predator now swimming above the same ancient sediments. Given enough time, future oceans will rearrange their currents, coastlines, climates, and food webs again. New ecological spaces will open, and evolution will explore them without knowing how long they will remain. Somewhere within those future waters, conditions may again permit something extraordinary to emerge. Whatever form it takes, its existence will last precisely as long as its world can support it. Nothing more, nothing less. It never does.